It is a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to share with you some thoughts on cultural diplomacy. Among several definitions, cultural diplomacy can be defined with Milton Cummings Jr. as the exchange of ideas, information, art, and other aspects of culture among nations and their peoples in order to foster mutual understandings. There is a large consensus in that cultural diplomacy is an old phenomenon and a new idea. Its practice going back a long time when the concept was not even established yet. In fact, cultural diplomacy was practiced much before receiving its designation, a few centuries before being defined and characterized. States practiced cultural diplomacy without naming it. The first time the term was used was in 1966 by Willy Brandt, then Minister of Foreign Affairs of Federal Republic of Germany. History teaches that the first manifestation of cultural diplomacy took place when travelers, explorers, merchants, and artists became a kind of informal culture ambassadors and diplomats. So, the establishment of regular trade routes created occasion for exchange of information and gifts between traders and government representatives. Such practice occurred long before the birth of international law, but from its conceptualization, cultural diplomacy starts to attract the attention of experts in international relations. With the end of World War II and the beginning of the ideological confrontation East-West, culture gained greater visibility and became the center of international games of influence. This allowed cultural diplomacy to project internationally as an indispensable tool in the way of affirmation of national prestige through the diffusion of one's own language and cultural models in the hope to influence foreign public opinion through communication, culture, and sports, besides diplomatic agents. When the USA assumed leadership of the world fighting communism, cultural diplomacy became a central part of its strategy. During the Cold War, it promoted a number of activities to spread American knowledge, skills, and ideals. Foreign conference, intellectual publications, exchange program for students and artists, and the best known of all, the Peace Corps program. The peaceful coexistence of the two main ideological blocs during that time resulted from the perception on both sides that they could completely destroy each other with their nuclear weapons. Therefore, such coexistence was based on so-called terror balance between the superpowers. The good thing is that it propitiated a tremendous cultural exchange. With the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the ideological battle was considered won. A new world order was established. Professor Fukuyama called it the end of history. On account of this, many countries, including the USA, relegated cultural diplomacy to the back seat. The efforts declined and the investments diminished considerably. But the 9/11 events proved that the world had not reached the end of history. It simply entered a new phase of transition, and this new phase demands a reformulation of cultural diplomacy. Truly, the terrorist attacks in New York and the Iraqi war alerted the world to the need of promoting a more dynamic and efficacious cultural diplomacy as the best way to confront the exacerbation of fanatic tendencies proliferating everywhere. Cultural dissension, in its ethnic and religious versions, could threaten national stability and international relations as well. For an African like me, it is enough to remember the recent happenings in Nigeria, Mali, and Central African Republic. It seems clear that the multiplication of factors of dissension fed by groups using ideological pressure and by forces driven by obscurantism and extremism, which use confrontation and blind violence as their main weapons, have catapulted cultural dialogue to the center of the international diplomatic agenda. According to András Santo, after 9/11, three new understandings emerged. Firstly, towards a large part of the world, it's still necessary to engage or re-engage in cultural diplomacy or soft means. Otherwise, the risk of disruption and conflict will be higher. Secondly, cultural diplomacy must take into consideration the complexity of international relations. In fact, nowadays, we are not witnessing a superpower competition between two radically opposite sides, but we have a multipolar world with different voices competing for attention and legitimacy. Thirdly, the relevant importance of the new technologies has become an important interface for people worldwide, with the Internet giving its contribution for direct cultural exchange without the need for artists or objects crossing boards. In the words of the same author, the traditional toolkit of cultural exchange is in short being put to a test. We find ourselves in a moment of great opportunity, but also considerable confusion about practicing and defining cultural diplomacy. Adding to the need for a reformulation of the concept is the fact that the role of culture has changed, and culture is now considered a motor of development. In fact, culture has the potential to contribute to development in many ways, including the creation of jobs and wealth. cultural industries have acquired expression together with the new world economy. As it is, globalization forced an increase in cultural production by great international conglomerates, causing an ever-growing media coverage in contemporary societies, from the rich to the poor, with large impact in behaviors and the consumption habits of the majority of people. At the same time, emigration from poor countries became a powerful cultural outflux in direction of rich countries. The greatest novelty of globalization at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century was the substantial progress in the use of information and communication technologies. These contribute to opening enormous possibility in terms of civic participation, freedom of expression, and access to information, which in turn propitiate increased creativity and innovation. In today's world, where cultures and subcultures are no more limited by the constraints of time and space, intellectual, artistic, and cultural change accelerates. Similarly, pronounced change in international relations caused great transformation in the cultural relation between states. Culture gained relevance in fundamental matters at the international level. As cultural rights advanced in parallel with human rights, cultural awareness became a constant presence in questions like the growing importance of minorities, the multicultural form of life, the affirmation of culture as a fundamental right, thus contributing to enrich a new vision of culture. All of these give a new impulse to cultural diplomacy, causing some authors to consider that we are in presence of a new cultural diplomacy, which recognizes the various actors and places originating and disseminating culture, and which is concerned with not stopping at the occasional and simple event, but with generating continuity and affirming processes. At this point, it is important to emphasize that one of the characteristics of cultural diplomacy is continuity. It needs coherent and persistent actions to be successful. In this, it is different from traditional diplomacy, which by its own nature adopts short-term goals and functions on a reactive basis, being limited in the appreciation of factors that should be taken into consideration or from which one might take ulterior advantage. Cultural diplomacy, which aims above all at promoting the image of country, works with long-range goals and seeks to establish cooperative relations between countries rather than between states. But on the other hand, cultural diplomacy should also be parallel and complementary to traditional diplomacy, to which it is intimately connected and at times subordinated, keeping, however, its own characteristics in what concerns its dynamics, methodology, and specific objectives. It facilitates the emergence of trustful relationships and cooperative projects. It uncovers affinities and identifies domains in which there may be common interests. It corrects and eliminates prejudice. A privileged tool to conquer the minds and the hearts of people. A way to bring people together. Cultural diplomacy is instrumental and complementary to accounts for an affair. Its absence can lead to a strategy guided by hard power, that is, by economic power or by the force of weapons. Considering the advance of economic and technological globalization, international relationships have become more dependent on soft power, which is defined by Joseph Nye as the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payments. This is the essence of cultural diplomacy. But we must in mind that nowadays cultural relations are less and less in the hands of states. Other actors, such as networks of creators and researchers, companies producing cultural goods, foundations, universities, think tanks, and other civil society organizations have entered the scene, offering new possibilities, challenges, and forms of cultural interchange. According to Jessica Hecht and Mark Donfried, very often, when governments alone were not able to establish the sustainable relationship based on dialogue, understanding, and trust between the civil societies of different nations, civil society organizations have proven capable of building and maintaining these relationships. This is a result of the nature of civil society initiatives, which are more flexible, use less formal mechanisms, and lend a certain amount of effectivity to their actions. Their versatility is enormous, their pragmatism undeniable. As Gino Hash and Dolphin say, cooperative efforts between governments and civil society organizations are necessary in order to create a common strategy in partnership which may guarantee greater neutrality and better reception from foreign public opinion. There is a natural tendency on the part of citizens in any country to assign greater credibility to program and message delivered by civil society organizations than by governments. Governmental programs and messages are instinctively believed as being associated to propaganda. But, on the other hand, states cannot and should not be absent from cultural diplomacy programs. States should guarantee that civil society private agenda are in agreement with national priorities and challenges. Cultural efforts do not appear to be immediately successful on account of being invisible and producing only long-term results. but their force resides in that they create an atmosphere propitious to forging understanding and minimizing stereotypes. Ignorance and unfamiliarity of one another generate bigotry, distort the views of one country in relation to others, making difficult or halting the establishment of the confidence necessary to build a climate of tolerance and peace. In this regard, Edgar Teles Ribeiro writes with pertinence: no other instrument of approximation between people will be as diversified, as endowed with symbolic resource and rich or nuance in a permanent renovation as cultural manifestations. Exactly for this, no others will be so instinctively perceived as a common heritage of humanity. The same author adds, none will have implicit the notion of prestige that generally is associated with culture, or the effect that this prestige makes possible in other fields. One nation's military or economic power tends to intimidate. Culture seduces. Nowadays, cultural diplomacy is making its way. New practices are emerging. Undeniable are the efforts developed everywhere, attempting to use the enormous potential offered by cultural diplomacy as a means to build a bridge between nations. I believe this is the only way that might lead us to a world of peace and stability. In other words, a fairer and more human world. Thank you very much.